The moment Princess Anne stood up inside Buckingham Palace, the entire future of Meghan Markle's control over Lilibet shattered in absolute silence. No warning, no preparation, no mercy. Just a declaration so sharp, so final, it sliced straight through the illusion Meghan had carefully built for years that those words didn't echo. They didn't linger. They detonated. King Charles froze mid-motion, his fingers still gripping the pen he had been using moments before, as if even the king himself needed a second to process what had just been unleashed. Prince William, seated beside him, tightened his jaw and folded the report in his hands, knowing instantly that something irreversible had just begun. Because this was no longer family disagreement, that this was war. A quiet war that had been brewing behind velvet curtains, hidden behind Instagram smiles, filtered lighting, and carefully curated motherhood narratives. A war between a mother who believed she was building a legacy and a monarchy that believed she was destroying a childhood. For months, palace officials had been watching, quietly, carefully, methodically. Not reacting, not intervening, just watching. Watching every video, every upload, every perfectly scripted moment where 6-year-old Lilibet appeared smiling, glowing, performing like someone twice her age. Watching every moment while something far more disturbing unfolded in parallel. Because while one child was everywhere, the other had disappeared completely. Archie, gone. Not dead, not missing, but erased from visibility so thoroughly that palace insiders began calling it something far more terrifying. A living disappearance. No birthday photos, no public appearances, no school updates, no spontaneous family moments, nothing. It was as if one child had been elevated into a global brand while the other had been quietly buried beneath it. And the palace knew something was wrong long before the world did. Because behind the glowing image Meghan projected, palace investigators were quietly assembling a timeline. And what they discovered chilled even the most hardened royal advisors. Schedules, contracts, production logs, call sheets, nearly 200 hours of recorded production involving Lilibet. In just 3 months, 200 hours, for a 6-year-old. Not schoolwork, not playtime, production, filming. Performance. Prince William reportedly said those words after reviewing the numbers. And he wasn't whispering. He was furious because this wasn't accidental exposure. This wasn't occasional sharing. This was systematic, structured, engineered. Mondays and Wednesdays, filming sessions. Thursdays, vocal coaching. Weekends, live appearances. There were no gaps, no breaks, no escape. Childhood had become scheduled content. And then came the moment that broke everything. That wasn't from a tabloid. That came from someone who had been there. Someone who watched a 6-year-old child try to perform happiness on command and fail. Because children can pretend for cameras. But they can't pretend forever. And somewhere inside that house, Prince Harry had begun to see it too. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Slowly. Painfully. He began noticing the lights, the cameras, the equipment that appeared without warning, the microphones clipped to furniture, the rehearsals that turned into routines. And most devastating of all, he began noticing Archie retreating. That single sentence changed everything. Because flinching isn't behavior you teach, it's behavior you develop. When something feels unsafe, when something feels overwhelming, when something feels out of your control. And suddenly, Harry realized the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. One child had been pushed forward into constant visibility. The other had been pushed backward into silence. Not intentionally, not maliciously. The palace didn't panic publicly. But privately, emergency meetings began immediately. Princess Anne took control. Legal teams assembled. Psychologists consulted. Because what they were seeing wasn't just controversial. It was unprecedented. A royal child living outside palace protection, becoming something the monarchy had never allowed before. A product. And Meghan knew the palace was watching. She could feel it. She could sense the shift. So she did what she always did best. She stepped in front of the camera. The words sounded perfect. Empowering. Progressive. Martin. But inside palace walls, those words triggered alarm bells louder than any accusation ever could. Because empowerment and exploitation can look identical until you examine who benefits. And the palace had begun asking the one question Meghan could not control. Where does empowerment end and exploitation begin? Behind closed doors, Princess Anne had already reached her conclusion. This was no longer about public image. This was about intervention. Formal notices were drafted. Legal pathways activated. Constitutional authority invoked. Because for the first time in modern royal history, the crown wasn't reacting to scandal. It was preventing one. And Meghan Markle, for the first time since leaving the royal family, was no longer in control of the narrative. She was now in direct conflict with the most powerful institution she had ever known. Not as a duchess, not as a public public figure, but as a mother. And the palace wasn't preparing to negotiate. It was preparing to intervene, because what came next would not just determine Meghan's authority over Lilibet, it would determine whether the monarchy could legally strip her of control entirely. And the most shocking move of all had already been set into motion. The most devastating betrayal Meghan Markle would ever face didn't come from the palace. It came from inside her own home. Prince Harry had been silent for months, watching, absorbing, enduring. But behind that silence, something irreversible had already begun. Because on January 2nd, without warning Meghan, without consulting her, without even hinting at his intentions, Harry filed a legal petition that detonated the foundation of their entire family structure. It was bold. It was shocking. It was nuclear. This wasn't negotiation. This was extraction. Harry wasn't asking for compromise. He was asking for control. And when palace officials read the filing, even they were stunned by how direct he had become. There was no diplomatic language, no emotional cushioning, just facts, statements, declarations, testimonies. He described structured filming schedules. He described the constant presence of cameras. He described Archie retreating upstairs whenever filming began. He described his own home, feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a production set. But the most devastating moment wasn't Harry's words that it was Lilibet's. That answer froze the room. A 6-year-old child admitting in her own words that smiling had become an obligation. Not a feeling, not a reaction, an obligation. And when asked who made her feel safest, her answer didn't mention Meghan. That single sentence broke something inside the palace, because suddenly this wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't interpretation. It wasn't gossip. It was testimony. Raw, innocent, unfiltered. And it confirmed what Harry had feared for months. His children were drifting apart inside the same home. One drowning in visibility, the other drowning in silence. Princess Anne didn't hesitate. She moved immediately. Legal notices were issued, commercial partnerships were frozen, production involving Lilibet was halted, and for the first time since Meghan left the royal family, the crown invoked a power it had never used before. The Descendants Protection Clause, a legal mechanism designed to protect royal children even from their own parents. Meghan had expected resistance. She had expected criticism. She had expected media attacks, but she had never expected this: institutional intervention. Because now the palace wasn't defending its reputation, it was defending her children. And behind closed doors, Princess Anne made the decision that would permanently redefine Meghan's authority forever, that this wasn't symbolic, that this wasn't ceremonial, this was operational. Psychologists, legal advisors, welfare specialists, diplomatic liaisons, all focused on one mission, protect the children. At any cost, because the palace had reached a conclusion that terrified Meghan more than anything else, they no longer trusted her judgment. And then came Operation Veil, the contingency plan Meghan never saw coming, that it was precise, that it was devastating, that it was final. If Meghan refused to cooperate, Lilibet's association with royal branding would be legally severed. Not her bloodline, but her identity, her image, her commercial value. Everything Meghan had built around her daughter could be erased overnight, and Meghan knew exactly what that meant, because without royal association, the brand collapsed. The platform dissolved, the leverage vanished. For the first time since leaving the monarchy, Meghan was no longer negotiating from strength, she was defending from weakness. Meanwhile, Harry had already begun preparing for the final confrontation. Those words revealed everything. This wasn't revenge, this was protection. Harry had crossed the line Meghan never thought he would cross. He had chosen the children over her, and the palace had chosen him, not publicly, not symbolically, legally, institutionally, irreversibly, because suddenly the monarchy wasn't defending tradition, it was defending childhood itself. And Meghan Markle now faced the most consequential decision of her life, fight the crown. That sentence became the palace's moral weapon, not an attack, a boundary, a declaration that some lines cannot be crossed, even by a mother. As the Windsor Reset Summit approached, invitations were delivered, doors opened, opportunities offered, but behind those doors waited consequences Meghan could no longer control, because this was no longer about reputation, no longer about media, no longer about narrative. It was about legacy, freedom from cameras, freedom from expectation, freedom from becoming something before having the chance to become someone. And as February unfolded, one truth became impossible to ignore. The monarchy had drawn its line, not in anger, not in revenge, but in protection. And Meghan Markle, for the first time since walking away from royal life, was no longer walking away from it. She was being pulled back into it by the one force she could never outrun.